As Americans, do you think that we pick up a book and read our history? No, sir. Do you think we learn it from history classes? No, sir. We're sitting in the back of the classroom looking, waiting for the next sock hop, just dreaming about the next sock hop. Maybe grabbing an egg cream at the local root beer stand with your best gal. That's the American dream, and when it comes to history, we leave that to Hollywood and Mel Gibson.
Are you going to teach me to read them?
If you like. And what language?
American.
Because if anybody knows Scottish history better than anybody else, it's Mel. To be fair with you guys, we have created this illusion of William Wallace.
But they'll never take our freedom!
And the only thing that Americans know about William Wallace is through the movie Braveheart. When you watch Braveheart, you automatically assume this was a poor villager. Did you watch it?
Yeah, I watched it.
So what did you get from it?
He was a hero.
Yeah, he was a hero, but he was just this poor guy that England was intruding on Scotland. We went to Scotland and we was exploring Scotland. And the story that we was hearing from William Wallace while we was in the UK in general was completely different than the story
Of Braveheart.
of Braveheart. Just like a Hollywood movie, we want the truth even if we can't handle the truth. So today, real quick before we get into that, these are our Patreons. Our Patreons get a behind-the-scene look and help support the channel, as well as our channel members. If you'd like to be a member of the channel, click down below. If you'd like to be a Patreon, click the link in the description. Our Patreons help us, they help support the channel. In return, we give them updates on the channel, and right now, the channel members are helping us redesign the entire channel. If you feel like you've been here long enough, that you want to help support this and do a good thing, become a Patreon, become a member today. For the people. Patreon members. Okay, guys, today we are watching a video by Biographics called William Wallace, the larger-than-life hero. We want to know the truth of it. So before we do anything else, like in the video, we're going to get into the video. Okay, guys, let's get started. Hit the like button. And if you're feeling a little snazzy and that little hype thing gets up, hit the hype button because more people need to know the truth of William Wallace.
Thanks to the 1995 Mel Gibson movie Braveheart, most people are fairly familiar with the name William Wallace. Unfortunately, thanks to the same film, most people have a mental picture of him that varies between mildly inaccurate and completely wrong. But he was, of course, one of Scotland's most iconic freedom fighters. Right? Well, the truth is fairly difficult to track down, in large part due to the fact that he lived in the 13th century. Records back then were iffy at best, and doing even just a little bit of digging uncovers the fact that some of the original sources for many of the well-known facts about Wallace's life were viewed as dodgy right from the beginning. Wallace exists in that strange realm somewhere between historical fact and oft-told legend, which means separating fact from fiction can be tricky at best. We're going to give it a try though, so stay tuned. In order to truly understand Wallace and why he became such a figurehead for Scotland's national identity, it's important to know a little bit about the world that he lived in, and this all starts with Alexander III. Alexander III ruled Scotland from 1249 to 1286 after being crowned king at just 8 years old. That sounds like a recipe for disaster, and it nearly was. While he was still a child, rival factions within the country struggled for control of the young king, but when he turned 21, he made it clear that the crown was very much his own to do with what he pleased. And one of the first things he did was to finish what his father had started. The islands off the coast of his country were under Norwegian control, and within just a few years, he had done what his father could not. He got those islands back under Scottish control. Meanwhile, at home, he ushered in something of a golden age for his nation. Trade flourished, and Scotland was on good terms not only with the countries and rulers of the continent, but with England too. The land dedicated to agriculture continued to sprawl, monasteries and abbeys popped up across the country, and these centres of religious learning, they flourished. Life was, for the most part, surprisingly peaceful. But like most good things, it wasn't going to last. Alexander first married Margaret, and tragically, she and their 2 sons were dead by 1283. They had a daughter too, who married Norway's king, Eric II, and had a daughter of her own. That child, Margaret, the Maid of Norway, was acknowledged as the heir to the throne, but things often don't go as planned. The king still wanted a male heir and ended up remarrying. He and Yolande de Dreux, Comtesse de Montfort, tied the knot in 1285, and for a time it looked as though a male heir was a possibility. Yolande was pregnant with their first child when Alexander decided to ride from Edinburgh to her side at Kinghorn Castle. He would never finish the journey, and a single misstep by his horse changed history. It was dark, the weather was terrible, and his horse slipped along the cliffside road near Petticoat. Alexander fell, and his body was recovered the following day. Yolande would ultimately lose their only child, leaving the little Maid of Norway as the heir to the Scottish throne. 6 guardians were appointed to watch over Margaret, who was just 8 years old. Scotland turned to the English monarchy to help secure her position as the new ruler, and England agreed. The king, Edward I, drew up a treaty which not only betrothed the little Margaret to his own son, who would later become Edward II, but also guaranteed Scottish independence. In 1290, Margaret, the Maid of Norway, left Bergen and headed to the aptly named St. Margaret's Hope in South Ronaldsay. And there she died. She passed away after suffering from severe seasickness, and this is where the tale turns. Had Margaret wed Edward II, Scotland and England would have been united peacefully. Instead, Scotland was left with no immediate ruler, and now England had a claim.
That's so interesting because it really is the idea that it just seems like the proper bloodline was the only thing that was going to bring the end of war to Scotland.
Yeah.
It just had to be the right person. Like, you look all the way up. We did a video on Mary, Queen of Scots, and you see all through I'm sure it's not that cut and dry, because even when Mary was in, when she was in power, there was people trying to kick her out of power, even in Scotland.
Yeah.
So even though Mary was the rightful bloodline for England and Scotland both, there were still other people trying to overthrow her just for Scotland, where Elizabeth had it.
Yeah.
So you're seeing this right here, that it's just like, if that one person would have survived, would Mary, Queen of Scots, or King James's story ever took place?
Yeah, it would have been completely different.
Now, historians pretty much agree that everything we just talked about actually happened, like we said. But when it comes to Wallace, things are a little bit murky. He had already been born by the time Scotland was plunged into the kind of chaos that only comes when an entire nation is left without a clear plan for succession, but there's no consensus on even the basics, like when and where he was born. The closest historians have been able to get is somewhere around 1270, with both Elderslie and Ellerslie laying claim to the honour of being his birthplace. While Wallace definitely wasn't a nobleman, he wasn't exactly a peasant either. His father was a knight and minor landowner, and interestingly, he likely was from a family of fairly recent immigrants to Scotland. His family name, Wallace, comes from Le Wallais, which means the Welshman, and it's thought that he was a descendant of Richard Wallace, who had moved to Scotland alongside the Stuarts only in the 12th century. So what else do we know about his early years? Well, not much. He was well educated, knowing both French and Latin, and that was likely thanks to tutelage from his uncle, who was a priest at Dunipace. Given his later successes on the battlefield, historians have surmised that he had military experience before his rise as a revolutionary, and it's even been suggested that he fought for Edward I in various Welsh campaigns. It's also thought that Wallace had run-ins with the law well before he answered the call of the revolutionaries. Wallace took the education that his uncle had begun and headed to Dundee to finish it. According to one story, that's where he killed the son of an English constable who had insulted him. It's also believed he killed several English soldiers after they confronted him for stealing illegal fish, and it wasn't until 1297 that he became something more than a common miscreant. And this is where we're going to take a moment for a very important aside. There are only a few instances where a reliable source recorded information about Wallace, and most of those have to do with his two most famous battles, Falkirk and Stirling Bridge, and, spoiler alert, his execution. Aside from that, sources are a little iffy. In fact, the major source of information on Wallace's life is a poet named Henry the Minstrel, who was better known as Blind Harry. He was born around 1440, and that means he wrote his epic poem, The Wallace, a full century and a half after the death of real Wallace. And here's where things get even more complicated. Blind Harry, who was indeed blind from birth, claimed he wrote his epic based on the writings of a John Blair. Blair, he said, was a Benedictine monk who had been close friends with Wallace and who had written a biography of him at the request of a senior bishop. There's no actual proof this request was ever made, even though it's technically plausible. To go one step further, there's no proof that a biography of Wallace ever existed either, but there is a fascinating story that makes it possible that manuscript had actually been written. An early version of Blind Harry's Wallace poem included text by a monk named Arnold Blair, not John Blair. Buried in another manuscript is a title for that work supposedly written about the Scottish hero, along with a footnote that read Vide Cottonian MSS. And that's surprisingly important. The Cottonian manuscripts were given to the British Museum in 1700 by Sir John Cotton, and only 31 years later, a fire destroyed about a quarter of the manuscripts in that collection. Was Wallace's biography among them? Well, we have no idea, and that means...
Okay, when you watch the movie, and I don't want to keep comparing it to the movie, but I like saying this because if you compare it to a section, it seems like it'll stick in your brain more and you'll hold it longer, right? Mm-hmm. So when you watch the movie, it portrays him as just this born and bred Highlander.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He came from a village that looked like it's never seen an Englishman until the Englishman arrives. And then this completely paints a different story that he probably didn't spend a lot of, not that he didn't spend, but he kind of traveled back and forth between Wales and, England and there, which makes more sense.
Yeah.
But also earlier in the beginning, which it does portray that in the movie, that he had an uncle that taught him how to read and talk. But that doesn't really matter at the end of the day when you're dealing with noblemen. So you would assume that in order for William Wallace to, one, lead an army, for two, to be able to talk and share his ideas with these noblemen, there had to be something behind him for when he walked in there and said, hey, I think we should do this. Somebody's going to have to know who he is.
Yeah, he can't just be like a random nobody villager who's never
been
out of the Highlands.
Do you know how many people probably would come into, I have an idea. And they're like, yeah, you're a pig farmer. Go away.
Yeah.
But William Wallace, on the other hand, he had some type of backing. There was something going on with him. And just like that, they believed that his family came from Wales the same time the Stuarts did. So you're talking about the Wallace family and the royal line of the Stuarts. Mm-hmm. Was together. If there was a royal line at that time. Was there a royal line at that time?
Yeah.
That's a good question.
It's impossible to trace many of the details of Wallace's life back beyond Blind Harry. As if that isn't confusing enough, there are plenty of details in Blind Harry's definitive Wallace work that historians have proved to be false. One of the very first assertions Blind Harry makes is that William Wallace was the son of Malcolm Wallace. He wasn't. In 1297, Wallace wrote a letter to the mayors of the German towns of Lübeck and Hamburg. The letter has survived along with Wallace's own personal seal. It shows a hand drawing back the string and arrow of a bow, and it includes a Latin inscription that translates to William, son of Alan Wallace. And that calls into question the historical accuracy of one of the most famous and oft-repeated episodes in Wallace's life. The popularly told tale is that Wallace had married a woman named Marian and was visiting the lady and their daughter when English soldiers got wind of his location. He ran and rallied his own men, but Marian was executed in the meantime, and this cemented his determination to free Scotland from the English rule. So, did it happen? Well, maybe, but also maybe not.
So far, we really don't know much about him, and what they're saying is a blind man wrote something about him, and half of it seems fake.
So this is kind of similar to America, right? If we have something in America called a tall tale, mm-hmm. right? And if you go for a tall tale, those have some basis of truth.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If you look up American tall tale legends, you'll find that person, like Davy Crockett, mm-hmm. Davy Crockett he did fight in the Alamo. There's a song. It says, born on the mountaintop of Tennessee, wrestled a bear when he was only 3. Now, we know he didn't wrestle a bear when he was 3 years old.
No.
But we do know that Davy Crockett in America was somebody who was what would be considered a patriot.
Mm-hmm.
He did fight at the last stand of the Alamo. If you go to the Alamo in Texas, his picture's there, but the stories grow. And the same idea with cowboy stories. A lot of these cowboys that you read about, right, are real people. But a lot of the stories really come from one situation. A lot of movies that you watch, you'll find these cowboys that was never a part of it all go back to Tombstone, Arizona, which was just a singular thing. But every cowboy, every show, every movie is kind of based around this. And the Wild West was wild, but it just wasn't. It was a very short-lived thing.
Yeah.
And if you do history on it, it wasn't as wild as the movies make it out to be.
No.
The wildest part about it was surviving. And I
Mhm.
feel like that's kind of the same idea that's going on here.
Seems like it.
There was a greater man, and you have a blind guy telling your story,
Yeah.
and he did great things, so why not make him greater?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The English king didn't immediately step in to take over the rule of Scotland, and instead he first tried to install a king who he was fairly certain would obey him without any questions. That was John Balliol, and in all fairness, it was the Scottish lords who asked Edward I to choose a new ruler. Balliol seemed to fit the bill in that he was a descendant of former Scottish king David I, and the English crown also saw him as something of a weak-willed successor who would remember who put him in power and be eternally grateful for that. That was in 1290, and things went sideways really quickly. England and France were embroiled in conflict, and Balliol not only refused to support England, but in 1295 he formed an alliance with France. That, of course, did not go over very well at all. The following year, Edward marched into Scotland, dethroned Balliol, and took over ruling Scotland directly. Scottish nobles were imprisoned or found themselves beholden to their English rulers, and countless Scottish soldiers were forced to march alongside the English in their campaigns against the French. Revolt came surprisingly fast, and even as Balliol struggled to re-establish peace through more conventional means, the rebels believed they had an advantage. The English army was fighting France too, and that meant they had fewer troops to send against the Scottish rebels. In 1297, those Scottish rebels kicked off the First War of Independence at Lanark, and sadly, exactly what happened is unclear. Even Lanark's official history makes it clear that no one really knows just why Wallace chose to gather his supporters at that particular location, but it is known that Wallace killed the occupying sheriff of Lanark along with most of his men and kicked off the rebellion in full. This, of course, is where the story about Wallace's wife and her execution comes into the tale, but again, some historians believe they've outright debunked the idea that she ever even existed. Over the next months, Wallace and his rebels hit targets in Dundee and
So a couple of things that it just did right there. It just ruined the catalyst of the story of William Wallace, which, to be fair with you, during that time, I don't think that ruins William Wallace's cause. It just makes it less poetic.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If his wife never existed or whatever, maybe he was a full-out military man. It just makes it less poetically beautiful. And more of an idea that this guy is just a soldier. This guy is just somebody who does not. Now, to look up and say that he didn't have a qualm against England, he probably did, but like this right here, the other thing that it set up is, the King of England was invited in by the noblemen.
Yeah.
And then you look at the idea, and I'm not saying what's right or wrong, but it's like politics then is very similar to politics today in the sense that from a broad view, it's easy to say this is right and this is wrong. But once you start seeing the details, then everything starts becoming a little bit murky. And you see that in this as well. It's like, who's right and who's wrong is depend on who you want to turn a blind eye to.
Yeah, what side you want to take more, really.
Yeah, because you see, and that what's interesting too is Scotland's bond with France.
Mm-hmm.
Not to bring it up again, but we know from other videos that this bond between Scotland and France goes on for a long time.
Yeah.
You know, Mary Queen of Scots was sent to France for safety.
Yeah.
So it makes you think, and it's, you know, the Bible says there's nothing new under the sun. And just like, I don't know what I expected. I guess I expected answers, but the more we get into this, the more it just seems gray.
Yeah, it seems like we're not getting answers. We're just getting more confused.
Yeah.
And Scone. Other uprisings were led by Andrew Murray and the MacDougall clan, and on September the 11th, 1297, things truly came to a head across the River Forth at Stirling Bridge. The area presented some unique challenges to advancing armies, the most famous of which was very real, the bottleneck that restricted the advancement of the English army. After a series of failed negotiations for peace, the English army, led by the Earl of Surrey, advanced across the river to the northern side. Wallace was already camped there with his troops and had the benefit of the high grounds. He waited until a large amount of the English cavalry had crossed the bridge to charge with his spearmen, pitting the cavalry against the river and slaughtering them wholesale. Only some of those that tried to flee actually escaped the massacre, and it was a decisive battle that ended with the unravelling of the Earl of Surrey's coalition army. Where some Scottish lords had marched alongside him, including James Stewart, the High Stewart, that changed after Stirling. Stewart not only pulled his men out of the English army, but he attacked the fleeing baggage train to encourage them to leave just a little bit faster. Among those the fleeing English army left behind was Hugh de Cressingham, the Treasurer of Scotland. It's impossible to describe just how much he was hated by the Scottish rebels, and his fate says it all. Cressingham was flayed, and some sources say he was skinned while he was still alive, while others say he was dead. Pieces of his skin were distributed among the victorious as trophies, and the legend says further that Wallace took a particularly large piece of skin and turned it into a belt for his sword. The events of Stirling Bridge made that Wallace was a hero, sitting at the top of a victorious Scottish army. Unfortunately for Wallace, it was a short-lived victory.
So we have the victory, and the only image that I have of William Wallace right now is just a general or commander of an army with a win.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the ideology behind him, I'm not taking away the ideology. Don't take it away. I'm not saying he's not a hero. I'm just saying what I'm seeing right now. Because you cannot, you can't just take this single story.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that everybody looks at William Wallace and says, this is William Wallace, this is what he's doing. I think you got to look at a long struggle between England and Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
And all that builds up into the victories in just the loudness and the poetry that's went with William Wallace that all adds together that creates this thing. So,
but it just seems like, I don't know, like he doesn't know that much, and the movie just portrays him as a romantic hero.
Well,
he's not, apparently.
Well, no, because I want to look up and say the movie portrays him as such a catalyst, you know, to this Scottish rebellion.
Yeah.
In a way, he's not. But because of the stories told of him, in his actions, maybe not so much, but in the stories afterwards, he was.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And we still have that. We'll talk about that later on.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that because there's like a whole thing.
After Wallace routed the English troops at Stirling Bridge, he was honoured at a ceremony in Kirk of the Forest. Scottish nobles named him Guardian of Scotland, and this is one bit of the Wallace story that historians know a lot about. In 2016, the Scottish Borders Council and the University of Durham conducted a geophysics survey that uncovered the ruins of the medieval chapel where Wallace would have been honoured hundreds of years ago. Unfortunately for the Scots, Wallace's triumph would quickly turn sour. Edward I was a monarch not about to stand for the humiliating defeat his troops had suffered at Stirling, and in 1298 he marched on Scotland with thousands of cavalry, infantry and archers, armed with one of England's greatest weapons, the longbow. And that ended up being Wallace's weakness. Stirling Bridge may have been a triumph, but this conflict at Falkirk was a brutal defeat for Wallace and his rebels. The English monarch had learned from the mistakes that the military made at Stirling Bridge. Wallace had favoured a technique where he put his spearmen into a series of groups called schiltrons, and against cavalry, it was a brilliant and deadly strategy. Against longbows, it wasn't nearly as effective, and for the first time, Edward I's longbows decimated an enemy. Those that didn't fall to the raining arrows were sent fleeing by charges from the English cavalry, and although both sides suffered massive losses, Wallace's lost something else: support. Wallace retreated to regroup, and for the next few years, he disappeared from mainstream history. The hero who had, not long ago, sent letters to the other leaders of Europe proclaiming Scotland's independence from England had escaped, but he had also resigned his position as Guardian of Scotland. Over the next few years, he travelled abroad and met with some of those same leaders, hoping to cement allies for the Scottish cause. Like the sources for much of Wallace's life, sources that talk about his time abroad also vary greatly in the details, but there are some fascinating tidbits to be gleaned from them.
I think it's interesting, one of the things that you can see, because now you're creating more of this image. And it's not an image that's shown so much in, I guess it is shown in the movie to an extent, but just not as much. Now you're seeing him step away from the battlegrounds.
Yeah.
Right? And now you're seeing William Wallace step into, which once again proves a point of, okay, this is not some man from a village. This is somebody with some type of respect, because now he's switching to this form of diplomacy.
Yeah.
So we take this idea of guy who got his wife, killed, right? We know if he is the named defender of Scotland, which that victory on his, wiping out the British or the English on that is probably what deemed him that name. Yeah, with that
winning that one battle.
Yeah. With that, okay, the legend's growing in their mind, because, even Scotland, unconnected, is probably like the game of telephone. So as the story's spreading through Scotland, it's getting people hyped up.
Yeah.
Especially, I don't know how it is, but picture you're a villager in the Highlands, and the British are patrolling around your area, and you hear, and you don't like them there, but you just hear that William Wallace's army just wiped them out.
Yeah.
Just that one thing. You know what I mean? So this legend's being created. And it probably plays such more important role that he's not a nobleman. That he's just like in this, he's not a villager, he's not a nobleman. So we're not seeing him as this household name, or this idea of like, well, who is he? You know what I mean? Like, he is this somewhere in the middle, that he gives this idea of being rags to riches. Does that make sense? I think that the truth is always more interesting than fiction.
It's not 100% clear just where Wallace went first, but it's likely his first stop was Norway. From there, it's likely that he headed to France, and a strange thing reportedly happened. Wallace's trip to France happened at the same time Edward I was marrying his second wife, and that was Margaret, sister to France's Philip IV. The marriage was, by most accounts, an unconditionally happy one, and when the young queen was widowed at just 26 years old, she swore to never remarry, and she didn't. It also did what it was supposed to do. It brought the two longtime enemies together just long enough that England could turn her sights to putting down rebellion in Scotland. And according to some sources, France's Philip IV was on such friendly terms with Edward I that when Wallace turned up at the French court, no doubt expecting to find someone who hated the English as much as he did, he was actually arrested. Philip offered to hand Wallace over to the English crown, but strangely, he was just thanked for the gesture and asked to keep Wallace there. Why this was, we don't know, but if there's anything history has taught us, it's that England and France just can't seem to stay on the same page for very long. Within the year, Wallace had gotten back in the good graces of the French king. Not only was he released, but historians believe they know he was going next, and that was to Rome to plead his case for Scottish independence. But here's where things get slightly complicated, and it's also the perfect example of just how little we really know about Scotland's largest hero. It's going to take a little bit of fast forwarding to 2011. At the time, there was a letter sitting in the National Archives in London, and it was said to be a safe conduct letter written by Philip IV and addressed to the Pope. The letter confirmed Wallace's high standing with the court of France and asked the Pope to consider that when he was deciding whether or not to hear Wallace's case. There were two theories as to the provenance of the letter. One suggested that it had been taken from Wallace when he was arrested by the English forces in 1305, while another suggested it had been carried by someone else entirely and intercepted by spies. The letter was given to the National Records of Scotland under a long-term loan agreement, but there's still a lot of mystery surrounding it. There's no evidence to suggest Wallace ever made it to Rome, and when it comes to the question of whether or not he was carrying the letter when he was arrested, the closest experts have been able to get is just basically, well, probably. And that's kind of surprising. Wallace is this important, larger-than-life figure that represents Scottish independence, but when it comes to concrete facts and artifacts, there's just not that much there. This letter, along with the one we mentioned earlier, is it, as far as Wallace documents go. That being said, we're getting to the end of Wallace's tale, and it's not a happy ending. Some accounts suggest that around 1303, Edward I offered Wallace the chance to surrender and pledge his loyalty to the English crown, several times in fact. Wallace refused, and even that is up for historical debate. The sources that claim clemency was offered are English, so it's unclear just what the truth is. It's not known exactly when he returned to Scotland from travelling to Europe, but we do know he was showing up in skirmishes across the countryside in 1303. After his refusal to bend to the knee of England and Edward I, Wallace was officially declared a
So that's really interesting that he was showing up in skirmishes, right?
Right.
So if we take this idea, right, and you try to see where the movie comes from, right? So he's been to Rome, he's been in France, and all this time he's been working for Scotland to gain their independence. Now, they're still trying to figure out who their king is going to be, right? So there is no focal point in Scotland. There's really nobody to rally behind. So there has to be a rallying person. And you say, he just said, he keeps showing up in skirmishes, just like different skirmishes throughout.
Yeah.
Was he, because during World War II and during that time, like if somebody won a Medal of Honor, right? They would, and Band of Brothers is a good one for that, or the Pacific. I think it was the Pacific. If you guys watch those movies, or that it's like a short HBO series. I think it was the Pacific that during one of the fights, this guy won the Medal of Honor, won a high ranking because he carried people out and he won the Medal of Honor. But because he won the Medal of Honor, he was constantly put in front of other soldiers. And he was constantly, now this man's held in the highest regard.
Yeah.
So now you're seeing William Wallace show up in these skirmishes. Not saying that he wasn't playing more of a tactical role, which he probably was. But was he also there, and was this part of this idea that when he walked into this thing, and these stories has been taught that he was the one who went in there, and absolutely just massacred the British?
Yeah.
Are they saying, okay, William Wallace is here today, we're going to win this?
Yeah, like
was this another stepping block to get to where his status is today? I think that's an interesting thought that he's, you know what I mean? That all these things are coming together because he's getting all these points together. If he's throwing up in different skirmishes, meeting different soldiers, because now if he was a protector of Scotland, now his name's known. So when he shows up, people's knowing that.
Yeah, it seemed like he was going around trying to make as much connection as he could.
Yeah.
traitor to the crown and an outlaw. This declaration, it was a powerful one, and it meant it was open season on him. Anyone could kill him without mercy or feeling the least bit of guilt, and on the same note, giving him aid or safe passage was considered treason. It wasn't long before he was captured and handed over to the English by a fellow Scotsman named Sir John Menteith. And this is where we can say, without a doubt, that we definitely know exactly what happened to Wallace. He was executed in London's Smithfield area on Monday, the 23rd of August, 1305. We know because the event, the spectacle even, was recorded by numerous monastic chroniclers, and for the most part, their testimony was the same. The execution itself was a long, gruesome affair, but there was a method to the madness. The punishments were handed out to fit the crimes that he had been found guilty of, and first was the crime of treason. As punishment, horses dragged him through the streets of London to the site of his execution. Next was the punishment for murder and robbery, and that was to be hanged until not quite dead. He was cut down and then suffered his punishment for the desecration of churches. He was castrated and disemboweled, his organs set on fire in front of him. Whether or not he was aware of what was going on, sources are vague. They do seem to agree that when he was cut down from the gallows, he was still very much alive. Lastly was the punishment for being named an outlaw, and that was beheading. His head was mounted on London Bridge, and what was left of the rest of his body was cut into 4 parts and displayed in Newcastle upon Tyne, Berwick upon Tweed, Perth, and Stirling. When we call the entire thing a spectacle, it really was. His execution marked the opening of the Bartholomew Fair, which was one of the largest communal gatherings in 14th century England. There is a bit of irony here too, in that St. Bartholomew was both the patron saint of butchers and of tanners. Was Edward I making a statement, bringing an end to Wallace's rebellion on the day dedicated to the patron saint of butchers? Well, maybe, but it is, of course, impossible to say for sure. St. Bartholomew's apocryphal literature has him learning the secret cosmic knowledge from the divine, bringing together goats, leopards, and even a werewolf in peace. Wallace reportedly skinned Hugh de Cressingham and wore his hide as a belt long before he was beheaded by the English king, and St. Bartholomew was both skinned and beheaded before being dismembered and having his remains scattered to the 4 winds. Much like Bartholomew became one of Christendom's most tormented martyrs, Wallace became an even more important figure for Scottish resistance after his execution, and remained so for hundreds of years.
So if you want to watch the video fully uninterrupted, I'll post the link down there. I love biographics. I like the way he does. I also want to take into a little bit of account that a British man is doing this. I feel like he's kind of, what's it called? If we'll start before we get into the discussion. We're only going by what we're told here. Yeah. If you guys have another idea or something that you feel was wrong about this, just post it down below. We'll try to read the comments and go through. And if you can't, we have Discord. I'll post a link to our Discord down below, and you can, go and tell us there. 2 things that pop into my mind is, 1, he's not what they said he was.
No.
2, he is everything that they said he was. Right?
Yeah.
So if you look at this guy and say, at the very end of when you watch Braveheart, and when you hear the term William Wallace, you think of free Scotland. He is the symbol of free Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
So in the ways that he wasn't, also he is. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And it does drive back to this tall tale, right? So it's not the idea of, was William Wallace the strongest man, the most fearless man? Was he married? Did he get done wrong by the British? Was he trying to be diplomatic for the British? The one thing that shines through all that fog, what we know, was that he was a patriot to Scotland.
Yeah, he wanted Scotland to be free.
So the idea is, do you want every deed and detail in his life to line up to exactly what's true, what's right, what's wrong? Or do you just need him to be that symbol? And if he is that symbol, then he is who you say he is.
Yeah, I get it.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's just somebody to give people hope.
Yeah. And in that sense, Mel Gibson's story, which they say he invaded York, right? He didn't invade York. We know he didn't invade York, but we do know he had skirmishes more closer to the border.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, but at the end of the day, you could kind of say, I mean, they are kind of washing it a little bit, but you could say that the movie itself it's kind of doing what the original stories was doing.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, because that's what I was going to say is like with whatever the blind man wrote and the other stuff that they think that might have been in that book that burned.
Yeah.
Like the movie just seems like it's playing on that and filling in the blanks.
Yeah. And just going
Which
on.
that's what a movie's going to do. They have to make it interesting.
Hopefully. I mean, some of you guys are Scottish and you got Scottish blood. Does that seem right?
Yeah, like what's your opinion of it?
What's your opinion of William Wallace? Was he everything he was cracked up to be? Do you find more of a symbol of William Wallace more than just like, oh, he was the greatest hero, tall tales, or maybe he's lying and there's more to the story and Scots have a different side? Let us know below.
I just can't get over how they killed him. Like, it's so graphic.
So as an American,
horrible.
The only reason we know the term hung, drawn, and quartered is because of William Wallace.
Yeah.
That's the only reason we know that.
I wonder when was the last person to be done to in London.
I don't know. We took that tour. There was a lot more brutal things that happened in that Tower of London than just that. That was the least. If you don't believe us, watch our Tower of London video. That was a lot. All right, guys. I'm Rich Trippin.
I'm Tiffany.
If you like the video, if you made it this far, subscribe.
Yeah, because you sat through a lot.
You sat through a lot. And we go through this, and we're going to start doing more that we're going to have a little bit deeper discussions on this. I'd like to set up live streams every now and then that we can talk more about the history and get back. But yeah, hit subscribe. You made it this far. I'm Rich Trippin.
I'm Tiffany.
And that was a real, as far as we know, that was a real William Wallace.